Welcome everyone, Testing for Good workshop. This is API testing with Java. So the agenda and structure will be two parts. So there will be two parts and a break in the middle. So part one will be building a RESTful API service with Java and Spring Boot. So we will create this service. We will create a model. We will create a controller. Ultimately, we'll create an endpoint. And then using this service, we will also pull out an open API spec file and also use a Swagger UI interface. If you are a tester or an SDET, I will say right now, Swagger UI, Open API, UIs or docs, as they're sometimes called in other frameworks, very, very helpful. So please, keep note of this. They're very helpful, especially if you're just getting into testing RESTful, or I guess RESTful API services. So that's the first part. We'll kind of walk through how to build this thing and what an API might look like, kind of at a high level in Java. And the second part will be testing this RESTful API service. And we'll be using Sauce Labs API testing, formerly known as API Fortress. So it's a great cloud-based service for writing, scheduling, and monitoring your tests. There's lots of fun features, so we'll kind of walk through that. And we will basically be doing things two ways. So test automation two ways for APIs. We'll be developing tests from scratch. So we're just going to start from, we have the service, how do we test it? Going and then into the second approach, which is actually making use of this Open API spec file. So generating tests from this Open API spec and kind of talking a little bit about what that is, but very helpful kind of technique just in general. And there will be some smart folks on the call. So there will be Nikolai joining as well, but also some other folks from Sauce Labs. So please, the chat will be monitored if you have questions. I'll try to take questions, not as they come up, but sort of after at least these two parts, but also at the end. So I'll kind of take the questions as I can. So yeah, that's the general overview of this workshop. So let's have some fun. So a little bit about me. So hello, I am Josh Grant. I am a senior solution architect at Sauce Labs, along with Nikolai, Chris, Ayal, and some other folks on our team. So I've been a solution architect for 4 years at Sauce. It's been wonderful. It's a great time. Well, mostly great time, pandemic aside. I've also been in test automation for 12 years. I have tested, or I have kind of built and maintained test frameworks for API testing with Python in the past and now distant past. Also, I've automated desktop web applications for Windows. So using tools like SilkTest and automating at the GUI layer. It is truly a GUI layer. And I've also spent most of my career automating with Selenium. So Selenium with Java, Selenium with JavaScript, other kooky things in there, kind of building, maintaining web-based UI frame, or I guess Selenium-based frameworks. And I am based in Toronto, as I mentioned. So what's more Toronto than Drake hugging the Raptors mascot? So there you go, a little bit about me. I'm the token Canadian on the team. So let's get into it. So let's talk about building a web API. Okay, so some folks here might be well familiar with how you would build a web API. You might have built one yourself. You might have worked with one. You might have tested one. And there's lots of different approaches to building a web API. And so when I talk about a web API, I mean some kind of service with endpoints that are available through the wider internet. So either something that you can reach directly using something like curl, something that you can reach through a web browser, something with a UI attached to it. So it could be like you have a nice UI layer to interact with these APIs, or even a mobile application. Mobile applications often use RESTful, or not just RESTful, but APIs as well to connect to services in various places. So there's a few different things you can think of when you're talking about web APIs in general. So you can think about architecture, like how are you architecting your application, your front end, or your kind of front and middle layers, if you will. So there's the popular model view controller framework. So you have these three distinct layers of model, view, and controller. This is the one we'll be focusing on, but there are other ones such as model view view model. This is where you don't kind of have, it's a little different. It's a little different as well. Kind of the architecture is slightly different. There's no controller layer. There's also this idea of serverless, where you don't have to manage the server. So I mean, these are things like AWS Lambda. There's other serverless services as well. In this case, serverless means that someone else hosts the server for you. And there's even crazier things, like you could probably architect things in even different ways. And when you think about your application, you also have to think about how you're going to design your API. So you could use a variety of different approaches or protocols, such as SOAP. SOAP is kind of the older school approach. I can't remember what SOAP stands for, but the idea is that you would be able to, your API hits some kind of file in a certain format, and then that file provides you all the ability to translate and build a function sort of on your client side to execute certain things. There's also GraphQL. This is a kind of new kid on the block, GraphQL, where you can, it's more like a query language, like it's QL. It's more like SQL, where you can basically query a database directly, or kind of query data structures directly, sort of in a nice way from an API. There's also REST. That's the one we're going to be focusing on today. So RESTful APIs, where you make a request, you get a response. You can have a so-called thin client, where you just have some kind of REST client that makes a request and is able to handle the responses. There's probably even crazier things out there, or more exotic things, I guess I should say, that are even more experimental. You can also choose a different language or a different tech stack. So for middle layers or API services, popular choices these days are Python, Node, Go, and Java. Of course, you could choose other things as well. We're going to choose Java today. My go-to is Python, which is a very nice choice if you're thinking of building a RESTful service and building a RESTful API. But people use Go, people use Node. That's all fine too. And last and certainly not least is you should think about your data layer, your persistent data layer. So do you need to persist data? This generally means, do you need a database? So you might have a SQL database, like a relational database, MS SQL Server or Postgres or something like this. You might also have NoSQL, or even in memory, or you might have none. You might have a service that just basically, computes things and sends them back. So you don't really have to persist data. So these are all different things that you can think of when you think about like a RESTful API service. So in this tutorial, or this workshop, I guess I should say, in this tutorial, we will build a RESTful, like a REST-based, Java-based CRUD application. So CRUD meaning create, read, update. It's a nice little acronym, called sauce logs, with a very minimal data layer. So sauce logs, it is a service that keeps track of your sauces. It's not overly interesting, but it kind of serves the purpose of like what you might do with like a standard service. Okay, so we're going to use this model view. Oh, I didn't mention this here. We're going to use a MVC model view controller architecture, which is pretty standard in the kind of front end in the web world. It could be standard too in the mobile world, I don't know. But it's a kind of conventional approach. So what is a model? Let's talk about the different layers. MVC, model view controller. So what is a model? So a model is a pure data structure representing an entity in your system. Okay, so this could be something like, what is a user? A user might have a name, might have an email address. The email address might have to be unique in the system. Oh, and I just forgot at the end of the workshop, just one more thing. I guess you can't do just one more thing 5 minutes in. At the end of the workshop, we will be having a prize giveaway. So please stay tuned, stick around. And some of the lovely sauce colleagues I have here will be arranging a prize for one lucky person who stays on the call. So definitely stick around. So back to models. So you can have an entity such as a user or an account, and there might be restrictions like, et cetera. So here we have a single entity in this. We're going to keep it simple. We're just going to have a single entity called a sauce. So every sauce must have a name, which doesn't have to be unique. It has to have some kind of description, like what does the sauce taste like, what's in it, and a heat level. So the heat level is a number from 1 to 10, an integer, if you will, from 1 to 10. So 1 being it's not spicy at all, 10 being it's incredibly spicy. So you want some sort of range. So we're going to keep track of these sauces, what they kind of taste like, and how spicy are they, how hot are they. Okay, so what is a controller? Well, a controller is a layer of logic that manipulates models for the rest of the system. So a controller lets the system do things with the model, or more specifically, lets a user control things in the system, control model or models, and other elements of the system. So you might want to update your sauce logs. You might want to add a new sauce. You might want to add or kind of update a sauce, existing sauce. Maybe the spiciness level is actually lower than you think. Maybe there's a typo in the name. You might also want to remove a sauce. So like you want to manipulate these things in some way, and that's what a controller does. It controls these things. So, and again, we're going to focus on a CRUD-based system, which, I mean, it's a very common pattern of being able to work with entities and control them. You can kind of effectively do 4 flavors of actions: create entities or create models, read them, sort of get back 1 or more, update them in some way, and then delete them. You can remove them from the system. So we'll be creating a CRUD-based system for creating or managing a list of sauces. So the other layers, so a view is a user interface layer. This is the layer that the user actually sees and interacts with. So this could be a GUI interface, so something like a web page, a mobile application page, a mobile web page, these sorts of things. You could have multiple views that kind of control the same models with the same controllers. You could have controllers that are unique to each view, this kind of thing. We're just going to set aside views here. We're going to assume that the front-end developers have that in hand. We're not going to worry about that. The other thing that I will gloss over is that most applications have a data persistence layer, typically a database. I am going to use, or we are going to set aside this database layer as well, and we're going to use an in-memory data structure, which is a horrible bad practice. Do not do this in production. It's even dicey in sort of test environments because data doesn't persist, and that's the whole point, is that it should persist. Some platforms like Heroku or other ones that I've tried out don't even allow this. You can't even have in-memory data because it's so bad. But for simplicity, we're going to have that here, just so that we have some kind of data persistence to it. All right, so let's do this. Let's get out of this world of slides and get into the world of code. So for this workshop, I will send the link. I should have done this at first. GitHub.com, Josh M. Grant. And testing for good API. So if you would like, you can follow along. You can either try this out yourself. Oh, where's the chat? So you can either follow along cloning this down in your favorite IDE. I will be using Visual Studio Code for Java, which is a good choice. You can also use Gitpod. There are instructions there for Gitpod as well to kind of work with this. Or you can just follow along if you'd like. This repo is available for you at your leisure, so you can try it out later. And these workshops will be recorded, so you can definitely follow along that way as well. But whatever works, this is here. So let's go back. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And let's build ourselves a, let's put this somewhere. We'll do this. All right. So, and just as a brief, so this will use Java 11 or higher. Java 8 is still everywhere. Oracle, I don't think supports Java 8 at this point. I think Java 8 will probably outlive most of us though. But this particular repo is designed around Java 11 and higher. You will also need a Sauce Labs account. You can create a free account, free trial if you don't have one. Pilar and crew can kind of put a link there. And if you could mute, that would be great. Thank you all. And so, yeah, and then there's the Gitpod setup. But I will kind of walk through. So we're going to be using Java Spring, and in particular, we're going to use Java Spring Boot. So Java Spring is a web framework in Java for building generic web, well, not generic, but building general web applications. Spring has functionality and plugins, I believe they're called plugins, for building general web applications. So things like building multi-page web applications, single page web application, internal, external facing, all that kind of thing. We're going to focus on using Spring Boot. So Spring Boot is a framework specifically for building like a RESTful API layer in Java Spring. And as well, we're going to use Gradle. So Gradle kind of is a nice helpful thing for just getting things started. So that's kind of our Java stack today, if you're into that kind of thing. So first thing I'm going to do, so the first thing I'm going to do, let's walk through some of the code here. Close that up for now. So standard Java project, there's lots and lots of directories, Java main or source main Java, and I'm going to create this file. So if you're familiar with Java, this is a single file with a single class, and the class has a main method. So this is your entry point to the application. Testing with Java. Well, great question. So I'm going to build this application. So the first part is that I will build this application with Java Spring Boot, and then we will test the application with with Sauce Labs API testing, also known as API Fortress. There are Java testing tools, things like Rest Assured, or you could roll your own. But I'll be kind of focusing on testing with Sauce Labs API testing. So I do want to go through the structure of this web application just so we can kind of see the moving parts. But yeah, talk about that a little bit later. So here is the main entry point for our service. If you're familiar with Java, this is a main function. So this is effectively what will run the entire application. And Spring kind of provides a lot of nice utilities for just kind of setting this up under the hood. So I've created this class, I've created this main method, very standard main method in Java, and I'm adding a Spring application, and I'm running from here, from Sauce Labs application. And this is all very boilerplate Spring Boot. So if I start this up, let's do this. So to start this, well, first of all, just to keep myself, we're going to Gradle. I don't know how to pronounce this. This is the Gradle wrapper. So similar to Maven, those are the two big ones in the Java world. So these are kind of task runners or dependency managers, depending how you want to think about it. And you can run certain tasks. So Gradle, boot run, or actually, no, sorry, build. So just to make sure I don't have any errors in my application. There could be warnings, there probably are, just to make sure that everything is building and compiling as needed. Okay, so the build's successful, good news. So now let's start this application up. So we're going to go Gradle, boot run. And so what this does is this takes this main function, this Spring application actually. So starts up. This service I'm going to run will be local, so you can run it either on Gitpod or on your local machine. It should function. It should function whether you have a Mac environment, Linux environment, or a Windows environment. The JVM runs on all of those. So let's take a look. So this starts up. So now, my service is now starting. So this is a local service. It's kind of a test instance, and it does start up at localhost on port 7000. So what happens? So now, actually, didn't mean to do that. So if I open up a new terminal, for example, I could go curl HTTP localhost 7000 API sauces, and I get back this 404. So when you hear about a service or an API service or a microservice, this is generally what we're talking about. There is some service running somewhere. Could be deployed onto a network, internal network, onto a staging instance. Could be on like a local laptop. Could be kind of Dockerized somehow. But a service is running somewhere. So right now, this service is up and it's running, and it does nothing. So if you try to hit any endpoints, you'll get 404s. Spring Boot does provide out of the box some 404 error pages. So for example, if I go back to my browser and I go localhost 7000 API sauces, I will get this. So I will get like this error page, 404 page, one of the most beloved pages in the internet, 404s. So Spring will provide this for you. So right now my service is up and running and it doesn't have anything there. So let's start adding on things to get this service up and running and kind of make our sauce logs application. So I'm going to stop this. Okay, go back here, Control C, stop this. Okay. So let's start. So what's the first thing, simplest thing we could possibly do? So let's start by adding a model. So I'm going to go check out V2. I'm going to add a model. So what is my model? We talked a little bit about a model. And if I go back in here, so under sauce logs application, what I'm going to do is I created a new package, a new directory here, sauce Java. And this sauce Java is a POJO, a plain old Java object, or I guess a Java class. And this will just simply represent, my object, my entity in the system, which is a sauce, right? So if we go back to what we were talking about, we will have a name, we have a description, we have an integer heat level, right? So 1 to 10. And we will create this kind of standard constructor here of this sauce, right? The only additional thing that we've added is this ID. So because we have a data persistence layer, we'd like to identify our sauces in some way. So as you add a new sauce, every sauce in the log would get some kind of identifier. So this is, again, a standard practice. If you think about how a database works, you'd have like a bunch of rows. Each row might have some identifier or ID, and the ID is unique for every row, so you can specify that specific sauce. So even if the names, even if you have two sauces with the same name, two sauces with the same heat level, same sauce with all the fields, they're still unique inside of the actual data layer. And Spring enables this. So Spring sort of has thought ahead, and Spring Boot, I guess I should say, and allows you functionality to identify sauces or identify entities, I guess, by a unique identifier. So we have this private final long as well. So this is an ID for the given sauce instance. So this is a pretty plain Java class. There are some additional utilities or constraints, I guess you could think of, because again, you might say to yourself, well, like the name is required. How can I make sure that's required? You might ask yourself, the description is also required, these sorts of things. So Spring provides constraints and annotations to enable this. So for example, with this name, the name can't be null. has to be something there. The name is required, and the name must be a string. You could also add additional constraints here. You might say the name can't be more than 20 characters, or the name must contain only alphanumeric characters, something like this, if you would like. I'm not saying that's necessarily good practice, but it's something you can do. So in addition to this, so we have this ID as well. So this kind of marks the ID as a constraint, or not a constraint, what's it called? Like a key, a primary key. So if you're thinking about a database, this is a primary key. Every ID is unique inside of the actual data persistence layer. So you have these getters, and I think these are the only thing is required are getters. You don't need to set these things. Java Spring allows you to update kind of through things. So the main structure is you set your members. So we have a name, description, heat level. Here's a constructor, plain old constructor. Oh, we also set an ID, but the ID is not exposed to the end user, kind of or it's internal, if you will. We want to get, but also update with. A Spring Boot, where you can update a sauce given a new sauce object. So you just provide this new sauce object, pass in the values with descriptors, and you can update your sauce. Okay, so this is great. So we have our model. Our model kind of defines what we can do. So if we start up boot run, we still get nothing. So if I go back here, our service is up. We still get 404. Now, in case you're curious, because we haven't actually connected this model to our actual service yet. We simply defined like what the sanity looks like. So let's do that. And just in case you were curious, so I'm certainly curious. If I disable this and I run this, I should get error connection. So like now there's nothing running on board. So when I stop the service, there's no service, and if I try to get to it, it tells me that connection was fused. There's nothing there. Okay. So what else can we do? We need to hook up this model to the controller somehow. So let's do this. So let's check out. So the controller. So again, what is a controller? Controller kind of manipulates models and logic within the system, but in service of the view. So like you can eventually present those things to the user. Will we also cover rest assured? No, we will not. I'm sorry, there's no rest assured in this workshop, but there will be API Fortress, which is kind of nice. So, and there's another question there as well. Where do you actually set API sauces, right? So that will be what I will cover next. So again, so models are effectively POJO, plain old Java classes or Java objects, but we need to hook those up into the controller somehow. So let's get into that. So now in my package, I'm going to add this sauce controller object or sauce controller class. So here is where I start to make use of, or well, like I make more use of like kind of the Java Spring annotations and functionality. So I'm going to create this service. Oh dear. Okay. That's funny. Sauce service. Resolve to a type. Sauce lines application. Okay. All right. Well, for our controller here, we're going to map this. We're basically going to define requests to an endpoint. This is where we define API sauces. So with several endpoints in a centralized way. The other thing I will note, so this is the endpoint, so this controls this endpoint, API/sauces. If I go back to here, because there was a good question about like where you define this. So if I go back to the main service, again, if I only have these disappear briefly. If I go back and I start up run. So this is just a generic service. I haven't really defined anything with it. So even if I went back to here and I went say curl by default, and you may also be wondering like how do you know it's running on localhost 7000? So that is defined here, and we'll talk about these other things later on. But you can define in the application properties, which is created by default. This is a default path for Java applications, but in particular for Spring-based applications, you can define the port here. So let's say you want to run it on port 5000 instead, or you want to run on 7001, you can define that custom here. You can also define some additional paths for other things, which we'll get to. We'll talk about Spring Dock a little bit later, but there's other configurations you could do here as well. So just for fun, if I go localhost 7000 and I go nope, I will still get this 404 because again, there's nothing running on my service. So any path or any route, if you prefer, any route that I try to fetch or try to request, I'll get a 404 back because there's nothing there. So this is a design decision that Spring Boot made. It's a pretty decent one, at least when you're starting out, because at least you can verify, is this service up or not? Could be enough, even if there's nothing on it. All right, so let's turn this off. Yeah, just good questions about configuration. I tried to keep things as default as possible. Don't want to do anything too fancy, but of course you can manipulate this as needed. So that's where you can find all that kind of good information. So let's go git checkout. All right, so let's talk about controllers. So in this package, so again, I'm following this pattern of everything in this package is related to a sauce, so a sauce model as well as a sauce controller. Let's take a look at this controller. So this controller defines what I can do with this endpoint. And I'll get rid of this. Okay. I guess I haven't defined my sauce service yet, so I guess we'll have to see what happens there. So the sauce controller, so it defines a service. So which service I'd like to use? I'd like to use the sauce service. And then it also, so the point of this class is to define what you can do with this endpoint, right? What is supported? Can I make certain requests, certain HTTP requests, and like the behavior of these requests? So for example, I might want to be able to get, I might want to be able to get a list of all the sauces. So I can use this. So again, Spring Boot does provide this functionality. So I can create a mapping here that just gets all of the services. So I just get a list of sauces, retrieve it from the service, get all or find all entries that are all sauces in the service, and return them. So if I make response is okay and well defined, the body will contain a list of all the items, right? And you could also kind of jazz this up a little bit. If you wanted to define your list in a certain way, you could do that as well. But again, I'm kind of keeping things as basic as possible. As well, you can have an endpoint that take different, what are they called, parameters or different values. So I might want to get all sauces using this. I just might want to call a get on this endpoint. I might also want to call a get on that sauce. Again, like if I'm doing some kind of filtering, if you think about a view, if I have a front end, I might want to search for a particular sauce or something like this. So I can also separately define this mapping. So this is a GET request that also requires an ID. So in this case, the service will find a particular ID, which is a long value, kind of as defined by my service, and I can provide that specific sauce back here. So what else can I do? I can also define a post. So what happens if I want to create a sauce? This is generally what you do with a post. You're generally posting something. So if you're not familiar with HTTP actions or verbs, like there's the common ones are get, post, put, patch, and delete. There are some other ones as well. Those are the ones we're kind of focusing on today. So a post is you're posting something to the server. You're sending some kind of data in a body. So your request contains a request body. That's non-trivial. In this case, the request body contains a sauce. So like I want to post this sauce and a valid sauce. I could also define something that's invalid. So I want to post a valid sauce to my service, and I want to persist that in my list of my sauce logs. So so this is what happens. This is kind of the way that Spring Boot works. You can basically create a path, and then you create an ID because you have to add this entry. And again, because you're not sending an ID, I don't know what the ID is of my log. I just know it's a log. As an end user, I just know I have a list of sauces, maybe with additional fields. I don't know. So this kind of appends or adds, I guess append is the wrong word to use, but it adds an ID to put this into my system. And then it tells me like that it was created, and it gives me back the body and the request. So that's what my post looks like. I can also have a put. So put is kind of an update. So I can update one of my sauces. So here, this is the logic where, again, like I pass in the ID, retrieves that ID, validates like, is this ID here or something like this. And then it updates, again, with the change the description of my sauce. If I want to change all of those things, I can do that. And last and certainly not least, in terms of what's available in terms of this service, what can I do with this endpoint? I have a delete mapping. So again, I pass in an ID and the service will delete it and pass back a response of no content. So this is a very standard approach for delete requests. Kind of as we'll see, getting back a 204, like a no content or kind of an okay status code. Because all you need to do is delete the thing. That's all you need to do. There is also an exception handler. So, so here, if I pass in some kind of request and it's just not valid, so if I pass in a post without a body, this exception handler will raise and say like you can't do that. If I try to make a post, if I try to make a put without an ID, exception will raise and kind of percolate back, say you can't do this, method not allowed. So something like this. So this is, again, this is a very basic, like this covers get. So like, can I get the list of entries? Can I read them? Can I post? Can I create new entries? Can I update or put? This could also be patch. I know that there is a difference between put and patch. I can never remember what it is. One of them, you have to update all fields or allow or sort of add all fields of a body. The other one is you could just add some of it, it's kind of like a partial, and delete, right? So this kind of defines what I can do with this endpoint and what is supported by this endpoint. So if I remove delete mapping, I can no longer call this a delete on this endpoint. I can't do that. So that's kind of where this is defined here. So this has all got to be stitched together using the service. So let's do that. So I'm going to add the service, and this is also where I'm going to introduce my very trivial, very bad, no good, don't do it, database layer. So if I go back, what have I added here? Sauce service. So I have my sauce service class. And this sauce service, again, handles CRUD actions. This is something off the shelf that you can kind of use within Spring Boot. And I can also add default items. So what I'm doing in this case, I'm trying to see where. So this is where you define the find and find all. This is where you retrieve the items from. In this case, I am just using a repository. So this repository is where I'm keeping this data in memory. So the repository is just a data structure somewhere in memory. If I start and stop my application, this repository goes away. If I turn down, if this was on a virtual instance, and I turn down that virtual instance, the repository goes away. The data does not really persist. But for this case, I just need somewhere to put the data. So this service creates this repository. You can also use this approach to connect to databases of different flavors. So for example, a SQL database, you can connect to like a Postgres database, a MySQL database, something like that. Or if you have like a NoSQL database, this is also where you would kind of point to like a MongoDB or something like that. All right. So the thing I am going to do, private static, I'm going to call default items. So here I'm creating these 3 new sauces, giving them IDs of 1, 2, 3, L, because they're long values. And I'm giving them names. So I have these 3 defaults. Oh, description foo. Oh, all right. Oh, the tester in me was getting there. So I have Easy Green, which is a jalapeno-based hot sauce. Heat level of 1, it's not too spicy. Cayenne Caliente, medium red sauce, which is a little bit spicy. And also Scary Ghost Pepper, which is a very red hot sauce. And oh, I guess I'll scroll over. And you can kind of see the heat levels here. So 1, not too spicy, almost no spice. 5, medium level spice, and then heat level of 9. Okay, for the ghost pepper, so like very spicy. Not unbearable yet, but getting up there. All right, so now I have all these pieces together. I have, and this was also required. So as I mentioned, this is specifically where, so Java Spring does allow you to have sort of a CRUD-based setup. So where you can just have standard actions where you kind of have a ETL, or you have some kind of like persistent loop where like you create entries and reads and this kind of thing. This is also where you would, this is where you could also start making use of a database and connections, this kind of thing. If you have strange configurations, or not strange configurations, if you have configurations such as like you have multiple databases, you have to point to prod versus like a failover, something like this, you would kind of use these structures. But in this case, I'm using just an in-memory structure. So very simple, just for demonstration purposes. All right, so I've got my model, I've got my controller, and I've got it all stitched together here with some service layer as well, all under my sauce. So this is kind of a common structure. Another structure that's common as well is to have all of your models together, all of your controllers together, all of your views together. But in this case, I'm kind of going by sort of model first. So like, everything sauce related. If I wanted to have an additional entity like users or something else, I would create a new directory, a new package, and it would kind of contain the same structure with my main right here. So, and the main file doesn't have to change. So putting all that together, let's close this up. So putting all that together, now if I go Gradle, boot run, will it work? Will it work with the typo? Yes, it will. Oh, love it. Love computers when they actually do things. So this is it. So now I have this service up. I've defined a model. I can actually manipulate the model with the controller. So let's see what I can do. So the first thing, just for fun, if I go nope, nope, which I'm not defined, I still get back to 404. So this is the common 404. And I will put in the chat right now a very helpful utility. I love to quote this as much as possible. HTTP cat. So, oh, and I'm gonna put that HTTP cat. Very, very helpful, very professional web page that lists all of the HTTP status codes. So for example, HTTP cat 404 will tell you that it's page not found or resource not found, maybe. So that means that it's not there. So the service is up and running, but it's not there. Or at least like it's probably not there. There are other status codes too, lots and lots and lots. We're just going to focus on the basic ones. But have a look around. Wonderful, wonderful utility. So this page isn't defined, but what is defined? Well, let's see if I go curl HTTP localhost 7000 API sauces. I get this. So I do get a response back, and the response is a list. So I get back valid JSON. Valid to get back just a list of objects, I guess JavaScript objects. So here I have my easy green, my cayenne caliente, as well as my scary ghost pepper. So I get that back. Also a utility, JQ. You may have this installed, especially if you're on a Mac or Linux-based machine or Nix-based machine. So JQ is a lovely command line utility, Java, or is a JavaScript query. So JQ allows you to manipulate and kind of work with JSON or JavaScript responses, but also formats it kind of nicely. So you can kind of see here, we have 1, 2, 3 entities. And I can do things as well. Like I could create a new entry. So I could do something like curl, I'm gonna make a post, and I'm gonna have name, need quotes, name. If anyone would like to come up with a fun name for a hot sauce, please put it in the chat. Description. A medium but tasty sauce, and heat level. Let's say it's like a 6. So like, you know, a little bit spicier. Anything in the chat? No? I've lost everyone. All right. Then I will put up with it's a good hot sauce, like happening, habanero. And of course, it might help to have the actual URL. So then we're going to have localhost 7000 API sauces. Okay. Oh, unsupported media type. What? Oh, I know what's happening. Okay. So I also need to, so I'm making a post. I have my -d is my data, but I also need, and I think this is a default as well in Spring Boot, do have to supply a header. So -h saying this is content type application JSON. Still doesn't like that. Request. Am I forgetting something? Content type. Level. A typo somewhere. I knew I should have put something in here. Anyway, so this is what a post would look like. Curl X post description. heat level. Sauces, local hosts. Something like this. Well, let's assume that worked. Oh, wait, someone in the audience, Szechuan sauce. Oh, good choice. Yes, Szechuan. Something nice and hot and tasty too. So let's say, so like we've already seen the list, but I could also get, so I could also go curl, HTTP, localhost, 7,000, one, oh, API sauces, one. And I could just get my easy green. I could also update that. Well, I guess I could update it. So something like this. So then you could do like a curl x put with some additional things. You could also delete. Delete is nice and easy. So let's do delete. Let's say, oh, you know what? I actually don't want to keep around the easy green. Actually, no, I like the easy green. Happening habanero. So now if I do get, so if I do a curl get, I will see I have one and I have three. I have ID one, ID. So I've actually removed my to caliente, cayenne caliente. So so that's kind of your basic flow. This is the basic application. And so that's the basic app. There's one last thing I want to show, and I'm going to turn off just for clarity. I'm sure if you've done any sort of like API work or API testing, you've kind of seen this workflow of like you can use curl, you can use different things. Curl is kind of the go-to. It's available on most applications or most platforms, including Windows now. Windows does have some kind of bash functionality in there, so that's really great. So let's also look at like a nicer way to see what's available. Let's see if there's any questions. As you explained earlier, Vue is like mobile web page. What is the Vue here? Can you once explain model controller? So yeah, so the Vue, the Vue is kind of like curl in this case. So if you think about an API only service, so there's no front end. Like in this application, there is no front end. There's no web page. There's no HTML. Really, there's no mobile page or mobile view. All you can do is access these endpoints directly using a service like curl, using something like Python requests, rest assured, so something like that. So the Vue here is basically no view, and it's only being able to directly access the endpoints. Yeah, so there you go. So I'm kind of setting aside the Vue. That's sort of the realm of front-end testing. So Chris Eccleston yesterday had a great talk, a great workshop on web testing. So that would be, so you can think of like that layer as the Vue. So like if you have a web page, you want to click around the buttons, kind of verify that things functionally work. That would be your Vue layer in this case. Yes, this Vue has, yes. So that's a really good example. I've never thought of this, but HTTP cat, one of my favorite web pages on the net, basically just makes requests back and receives pages with 200, 300, 400, 500 level, maybe not 500 level responses. And yeah, like the Vue is just what you see. So you get back a picture of a cat, and the cat to the meaning of that response code. So, so kind of here, I'm just saying the Vue is curl, or the Vue is nothing. There is no HTML. There's no mobile web page, kind of, or mobile, no mobile web page or a mobile application view. Ooh, what is the difference of using a Spring Boot framework? Oh, I love this question. I will get back to that question. I love it. I will get back to it as soon as I show this last thing. Which is, so we have this service. Oh, such a good question. So we have this service, and It works, or it should work anyway. So what else can we do with it? Well, it turns out, so HTTP, and kind of RESTful APIs are based on web standards, right? So you can look up, if you need to fall asleep one night, you can look up the HTTP W3C spec standard, and this outlines in very verbose detail how an HTTP client should work. So like, how do you send a request? How do you receive a response? What do each of those status codes mean? What does a body look like? What is allowed in a body? What is allowed in a request? What is allowed in headers? So in pretty in-depth detail, you can see what this means. So the good news of having an HTTP standard is that you can also build, you can basically also say, if I have this RESTful API, I can also say some very clear things about it. If I have this endpoint, so for example, if I go back to, just move this out of the way, sauce controller. So I've defined this endpoint, and I've defined some mappings or actions I can do with it. I can make a get, I can make a get with an ID, post, etc. You can actually standardize this into a specification file. So you can say, take this API, it's kind of based on standards, it's based on things that are pretty rigorously defined. And I can produce a file that says, this is what this should look like. This is what this should look like. And this is called the Open API specification. This is kind of an agreed upon specification for RESTful APIs to kind of say, based on this definition, this is what the API should do, or at least this is what the API has available as far as endpoints. So let me just see here. So I don't recall what this I actually called this. Oh, okay. So I guess we'll go here. Okay, so in addition to actually creating this service, you can also define very easily, I also might add, you can define adding an open API functionality to create an open API specification file. And in turn, you can also create something called an Open API UI, formerly called Swagger UI. So I've got this thing defined, it's all standardized, define this thing. If I go to so that's what this stuff was about. So I've defined my server port 7000, but I've also defined a few paths related to Swagger UI or Open API. So this defines the docs path, or at least like a path where I can get the Open API specification file. And this is where I can access the UI. So Spring Boot, as far as I could find, only supports the Swagger UI format. There is a newer format called Open API 3.0. Again, this is a specification, it's versioned. If you know anything about web standards, the good news is web standards are standardized things that you can build on top of. Things like XML, things like HTTP, things like WebDriver specification, very rigorously defined. So let's see what this is. So you're probably thinking, okay, they're great. That sounds awesome. So what is it? Tell me what to do. Okay, so I've added these things, and in my Gradle, so this is where I have, so this is similar to a Maven pom.xml file. In my build Gradle plugin, I have Spring Boot, Spring dependencies, but I also have this plugin. I've added this Spring Doc Open API Gradle plugin. This creates the automatically based on my services. This will create an Open API spec file as well as the UI file with particular versions. I mean, it's probably newer ones, but this is the one I picked. And the dependencies here as well. So I'm trying to think. Oh, this is the plugin. Sorry. So these are plugins. So these are utilities that allow me to run Gradle commands to do things. these are the actual dependencies themselves. So this is the Spring Doc OpenAPI UI. This allows me to create some kind of OpenAPI file, OpenAPI spec file, as well as an OpenAPI HTML or kind of UI, like a web page. So let's see what that looks like. So now if I start, this is where it's super cool. I know I'm talking a lot, but like the proof is in the pudding. So I'm going to go Gradaloo, boot run. So this brings up my service as we've seen, or at least I hope it does. So this initializes everything. So now, behold the beauty. So now if I go to, sorry, cat situation. Thank you. Build failed. Oh, of course it did. Oh, I'm already running it like an idiot. Okay. That's why you always close down your services, people. So actually, I'll just do this. Boot run. My like weirdo typing. Okay. Casing rather. So this runs. So now, so here's the cool bit. If I go to my browser, let's go to this, and I go API docs, I will get this. I will get this .json file. It's in a browser, and I can Control S and save it. Open API docs. New. I've saved it before. But you can just save this, and it's a JSON file. So you might think, okay, that's super cool, but like, what does that do for me? So this is the file itself, which we'll make use of later on in the workshop. And if I go to Swagger UI custom, as defined in my application properties, I get this. So this is an open API definition. So based on these standards, HTTP standards, and this open API standard as well, I will get this UI. This is super cool. If you are an SDET, please find out, and you're testing an API, find out if you have a Swagger UI or Open API docs page, because this will show you, this is all of what's available. So I have an endpoint API sauces, and these are all the valid things I can do. So I can call get and post. So for example, if I call get, try it out, execute, this can give me the curl. Oh, look at that. It gives me the actual request URL, and it gives me like what's in the database itself. So again, I've stopped and started the service. So I'm back to my default 3 entries. And I get more information as well, like what happens. I get 200 code back, but I could do other things as well. Maybe I want to get the API ID. So here it even tells you, like, so this is an ID, it's an integer, and it's required. Not now, let's go. So this is an integer, it's required. So if I go 2, for example, and I execute, this will give me the associated curl request, or curl command, I guess I should say, and this will give me back this specific sauce, as well with like headers and other sort of fun information. So this is super helpful. I discovered this in my last job when I was building an API test framework in Python, which was a lot of fun. Super helpful, because one, you can see like, what do you support? Like for example, you don't see patch. So patch is a standard HTTP verb. It's not here. So like, that's a question you can ask as a tester. Do you support patch? Should you support patch, right? And your developers might say, I've never thought about it. Or they might say, no, we don't support that because, and these sorts of things. But you get like a list. And this is true of every service and every controller, or every, I guess service is the correct way to think of it. Every service in your application. So if I added additional services, additional endpoints, they would show up in this open API, and you get this for free. So all you need to do is add. So if you're in a Java Spring world, add this to your build Gradle, add this to your Maven POM. Looks very similar. Oh, close all this up. And you just get these 2 things. You get this open API spec file and this UI sort of documentation for free. Some frameworks, such as fancy new ones in Python like Fast API or Starlight, which are pretty cutting edge, they'll generate this stuff automatically. You don't even have to add anything to your configuration. It just happens. So very, very helpful thing to do. But even in the sometimes big clunky world of Java and building web frameworks or building web applications in Java, still pretty straightforward. Add a plugin, excuse me, add a dependency, and there you go. So, and as well, just in case, I did add, it should be here somewhere. Oh, I know what happened. So, and I'm gonna close this down. So yeah, so definitely, if you want to play around with this API, you get this really nice UI that you can do that with. I'm actually going to check out main because I think I foolishly. Oh, I thought I included the specs. Yeah, so API. So, oh, and I think as well, if I go back, so if I start this up, one last note, which will become important later on in the workshop, Gradley boot run. That's the typo. One last note, at least in this configuration using Spring Boot, you can pull out this spec file two different ways. So you can pull it out as a JSON file. You can also pull it out as a YAML file. So just to show that and what that looks like. So here's our nice service with the UI. So this is all fun. You can kind of play around. Like for example, like let's say I try to like send this without a post. This is fun for testing too. Like what happens if I send an empty request body? What if there's nothing in here? And I execute, I should get back some kind of 400, right? Saying 400 bad request, right? Name is required, description is required, heat level is required. So that's definitely really fun to play around with. I sadly did not get a chance to deploy this to the cloud, so you can play around with it. But the other thing I wanted to show is localhost. So 7,000 API docs.yaml. So this will download the same specification document in a YAML format. So I can open this up, probably just in Notepad or in Notes, kind of the equivalent in Mac. But it will download this in a YAML format. So if you like YAML or you have tools, if you have tools that kind of depend on a YAML configuration instead, you can do this as well. So it's not just JSON, but also YAML, also kind of supported. And like I said, this is kind of the older approach. There is a newer UI, very, very similar looking, but it is slightly newer that you can kind of use as well here to kind of walk through and see what you can do with your applications. So I think at this point, if there's any questions, I'm happy to kind of walk through any parts of the tutorial or parts of the tutorial of how I built this application. Oh, what is the difference of using Spring Boot framework? Okay, does it help SauceOps run? Okay, so great question. So I'll get back to this. Excuse me one moment, actually. Sorry about that. Just have to blow my nose. So why Spring Boot, right? So a couple of reasons. So Spring, it doesn't help Sauce Labs run necessarily. Like this is adjacent to Sauce. What I wanted to do in this is show a mainstream application or a mainstream example in a common web framework in Java. So Spring is a very common web framework. A shocking number of things probably run on Spring. Spring Boot is kind of the associated API RESTful service. So if you're in your org and you're curious about, you know, like, and this will become kind of more important later on, if you're interested in like what technologies that you use to build a web application or build a RESTful service, or if you have different microservices, if you happen to know that your organization or your company uses a lot of Java, there's a good chance they use Java Spring. So that's a very common approach. So I mean, this kind of helps with that. Also, the tooling is pretty standardized. So as you can see, like Spring Boot kind of allows you to create endpoints very easily, create services very easily. It integrates with different flavors of database easily, or even just like it has like support for that data layer. So I chose Spring Boot because it's kind of one of the most conventional Java-based tools. I could have chosen other things. So as I mentioned, I'm a Python person. Love it. Python is a great choice if you're building a middle layer API RESTful layer. It's, a lot of people do this. Pinterest is a service that scaled up from using a microservices or kind of a micro framework approach using Flask. In Flask, you can basically create a single endpoint in a single file. It's very simple. And Pinterest was able to kind of scale up Flask. And I don't know if they use Flask anymore, but they were able to scale it up pretty large. So, I mean, that's another thing you could do. You could also use Go, you could use Node, but it is important to note, whatever tool you use, like you're gonna be able to use these same approaches, right? You're gonna ask yourself, what endpoints do I have access to? So going back to this, like for example, one of the advantages of, what did I do? Let's go back, way back. Did I turn down the service? No, yeah, no, I didn't. Excuse me. Oh, maybe I did turn down the service. Oh, no, I didn't. That's fine. Swagger UI.html. Oh, custom, forgot the custom bit. Okay. So whether you're using Java or whether your REST API service is written in Java, whether it's written in Python, whether it's written in Go or something else, you still have these conventional tools. So you still have, for example, you can get this Open API spec, so you can kind of play around. You also get the spec file, which we'll see how this is helpful in a moment or in a little bit. So yeah, so I chose. So I mean, and as a tester, you may not get any say in what these tools are. You might, one day your boss tells you like you're testing an API and you're like, got it. And you may not know anything about the underlying API. You might not know what language is being used. Is it SOAP? Is it REST? What happens to the data? Is it performant? Like you may not know any of that stuff. And you may not A, need to know that at first, but B, if you do need to know it, it's helpful to kind of know like a bit of the technology stack. So yeah, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So this Swagger will only show, and please ask any questions in the chat, or you can unmute. I'm happy to have a little chat here. This Swagger will only show the verb, what is implemented in the application. So right now we're not showing options. Please correct my understanding. You are correct. So this is true. So the open spec file only provides, well, and in turn, the Open API UI, this only provides information around what is actually specified and written in the application. So yeah, options is another one. Is another a verb, I guess you can use. So you can make an options request. Because I didn't define that, because if I go back here, because I did not define under controller, like I don't have an options mapping. If I did have something like, I don't even know what this would look like. Supported options. Yeah, I'm not even sure what this would look like. But if I had something like, I'm totally making this up, supported options, public response entity, and maybe it returns a sauce, I don't know. Options request, I don't know. Not even sure what this would really look like. Return response entity of new sauce. Let's do that, something like this. New sauce, and then of course that's not even really defined. Okay, so anyway, but it was something like that. So if I added this new mapping, or if I guess this isn't a mapping, but if I added this new mapping of the endpoint, that would show up in the spec, or it would show up somehow in the spec. So if I define an options request, I can send an options request and it kind of works in some way, that would show up in the spec file as well. That's not saying you can't make other requests. It's not saying like I can't do like some kind of request to this endpoint. You can do whatever you want to the endpoint, especially when it's up and running, because you will get back some kind of valid response, right? You will get back some kind of, you will get some kind of response back. It could be like 200 level, 300 level, 400 level, 500 level, but you'll get back something. Because that's the way that HTTP and kind of REST works, right? Is you make a request, you get back a response. The request has to be in a certain format, or there's certain specifications as to what's allowed for a specific request. And then when you get a response back, the response has to have a certain structure as well. That's all defined in the HTTP spec. But like the specifics, right? If I'm using sauce logs, if I wanted to have a log of coffees that I like to drink, if I were running a service to manage inventory, let's say I have a hot sauce store and that store has a service that manages inventory and users and orders and accounts. Sorry, I don't know where I was going with this. All of those different actions would kind of show up. So yeah, like something more complicated, I guess. Oh, great. You discussed microservices. REST services can also be treated as microservice, yes. I assume. What else can be used for making microservices? Can you elaborate on that? That's a good question. So yes, so you could, microservices, hot topic in tech. You might have a microservice that and this is a good example of that. Let's say you have a service and it's only for keeping track of a list of sauces. Let's say I'm an e-commerce company and I sell sauces, but I also sell fruit. I also sell meat, or I also, well, actually, no, I don't sell meat. But I sell like fruit, I sell vegetables, and I might have like a vegetable service and I have a fruit service. And those services kind of keep track of logging, the various fruits that I have in my inventory. So those could all be examples of a microservice. And then you put those services together for like an application. So something like, so Amazon kind of famously, something apparently Amazon did a number of years ago as a company was every department had to provide services that were consumable by other departments. So for example, if I'm HR at Amazon, I need to be able to make people have to be able to like make, requests or inquiries from me via a service, via a RESTful service. So, or I don't know if it was REST, but it was via some kind of service. So like if I put in a vacation request or a leave request, some other kind of, normal thing, like I have to be able to do that like via this kind of setup. That was true of every department at Amazon. So these are kind of flavors of microservices. So, and effectively, like a service is really just, or a microservice is just like, here is a service and here's how you consume it. So I kind of mentioned before, like this is a RESTful API service. You could also have SOAP, which is a different flavor. So you don't make a request and get a response. The SOAP is you make a request, you get back a big blob of XML, and the XML builds out a function to do something. Which again, like maybe that's helpful for you. Maybe that this is a good approach for your context. You could also, and this is a bad idea and don't do it. You could also just expose a database. You could expose a database, and you could say, okay, if you want to query this, you can send some kind of database query, and that's your service. Is like, here's your query and you get information out. So I mean that's another thing you could do as a microservice, maybe with like a thin layer on top. So any other questions? Like this is kind of the setup for, this is the thing we're going to be testing in this API workshop. All right, so so I think at this point we will take a quick, 10-minute break, a little ahead of schedule, but that's fine. Lots of time to kind of walk through all the funness of testing. But definitely play around with, if you're able to clone down and able to kind of test this out, I do recommend playing around with this. I loved it when I was testing the API level. Lots of fun things you can do. Or you can try, like, let's say you want to like change this address. You could change this address doing in application properties, change that here, this kind of thing. So part 2, so testing this web application. So some of you who have left maybe are wondering, why the heck do we go through that? Why did we build this web app? We didn't test it. We didn't do any testing. What's going on here? We're all here for testing. So why did we talk about architecture? Why did I walk through an example of building a test application or building a RESTful web application? So as an SDET or QA engineer, one of the biggest things I found, and one of the most helpful things, is often helpful to speak the same language as developers and as operations engineers. So as other people on your team, other technical folk who are responsible for the underlying app under test or the system under test, right? So as an example, going back to my kind of mythological example of if your boss tells you you're testing an API, you might reach out to one of your developer friends and say, where's your API code, right? And then they might not really give a response, or talk to this person, or like, I don't know what you mean, this kind of thing. Or like, where's your API? Like that's, but it might be more helpful to talk about things that we discussed in the first part of this, right? So do you use REST, right? Do you have a RESTful API? Where are your controllers and endpoints, in the code base? These might be more helpful. Developers, I find, what's the phrase? Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Developers are the same, all sorts in the candy bowl of life. But I found like a lot of developers at least want to help. If you ask them a question, they will try to give you some kind of answer. And so being able to ask the right kinds of questions is a big help for being able to move forward and kind of understand a system, test a system, kind of get started with this, whether you're doing automation, exploratory testing, these kinds of things. So I mean, this is one reason why, like, I kind of went through in the first part of this workshop, building an application and giving you a test application that you can start up and kind of test yourself and kind of see, what a controller is, what a model is, how those things relate. and also like where you can find like an open API spec or kind of a custom UI, or what's it called, Swagger open API UI, so you can kind of have a good entry point for testing and figuring out what's going on with a RESTful application. And this is true in kind of any area of testing. It's definitely true with like, Selenium-based testing, being able to ask developers like, what framework you're using to build your front end. How do you define locators? Can you put in these or can you put in these attributes and HTMLs to help us out, like these kinds of things. Thank you. Someone loved your approach that you, so from Automation Enthusiast, loved your approach that you advocate that as NetStat, we should know the basics of what is built. Yeah, it just helps. It helps to, like, I've in my career figured out, or learned, I guess I should say, if you're able to ask the right questions, if you understand the common language of who you're working with, whether that's someone in development, someone in sort of the business, like in sales or in finance, like knowing how to ask those questions and how to talk to people really helps. So just keep that in mind. If you'd like, in the chat, you can put kind of what you're doing, what your role is, if you are an SDET, if you do test automation, if you are a developer, or if you're a developer, web developer, mobile developer, otherwise, just so I can have a feel for like kind of what the audience is and what their interest is. Feel free to put that in the chat if you'd like. If you're a QA engineer, an exploratory tester, wanting to learn more about automation, more about testing or the web, definitely feel free to put it in. Just so we can have some context as to what I can focus on for this next part, the meat and potatoes, if you will, after the salad course. So as I mentioned earlier, and hopefully this answers the question too. Someone asked, why did you choose Spring? Why did you walk through Spring? So for better or for worse, Java is everywhere. Java, like in many large organizations, Java is the preferred language and tooling. So for almost everything. So you'll probably encounter Java Spring or Spring Boot in some way in large enterprises. But also, like, it gives you a flavor of like a comparison. So if you're used to working with Node.js, you can kind of still get like those commonalities, like where are you defining endpoints, where, like, are you using a model view controller architecture, like that kind of thing. So, all right, so let's see, get some responses. Love it. All right, so it's got some stats. Missing test runs can be checked with Sauce APIs. Yes, so that's a whole other that's a whole other topic, which I will not be talking about today. I have talked about it in the past. I will probably talk about it in the future. Sauce Labs, where every experience counts and every experience matters. Sauce Labs, the platform, does have a rich set of APIs for accessing various entities on Sauce Labs. So, so if you use Sauce Labs for running Selenium or Appium tests, and you want to get a list of jobs that were run, if you want to get a list of users in the system, and you want to check, like, which user ran this test, or, did this test fail, or how long does this test take to run? There are API services for this as well. So feel free to test those. Feel free to, if you have access to that, take it for a spin, as it were. So SDET, a QA engineer exploring Sauce Labs, great. All right. Faster build, failure detection best practices, if you could. Okay, so I could talk about this very briefly before we kind of jump in. So this is kind of a very side note, but we'll talk about it briefly here. From Sinna. So very briefly, a good approach in kind of a modern software development, fail hard, fail fast. So like, it's helpful, like, if a developer is writing a unit test and that unit test fails and blocks them from, pushing to production, like that's better than, pushing to like a dev, or pushing to like a production environment, or pushing to like a test environment where a tester has to find a bug and then report it back to the developer. And then if the developer and tester kind of miss a bug and it gets to production and then an end user sees it, like that's not as good as if you caught it before that. So failure detection, you definitely want your tests to fail hard and fail fast. So if you have Selenium-based tests or API-based tests, it's definitely helpful to, just as a general practice, with Sauce Labs or not, like if your test fails, feedback that information helpfully back into like your CI system, or to testers, or for QAs, or for SDETs, or for whoever's on your team. Sauce Labs can kind of help with this. Like if, for example, you could, there's a few things we could do, like for example, with API testing is a good example. You can monitor a service. So if we go back to our Sauce Logs application service, you could just send like a simple get, like every 5-10 minutes, or as part of a workflow, like, is this service up? Like, is it working? And if this service, and if it fails, then stop your CI process, stop your, so the service isn't up. You can't test it if it's not up. It's better than having like all of these test results that are kind of weird and there's lots of failures, and it's hard to understand what it means. Like, oh, the service was down. Oh, okay. So you could do that as well. Yes. And contract testing. So yeah, there's one more question as well from Automation Enthusiast. So one more question, like as in the code base, we didn't code anything for codes, Spring Boot handled it. So this is for example, talking about status codes. So what about different conditions for the same series, but like 200, 201, 202? I believe in code bases, we need to handle that, as I don't think Spring Boot is intelligent enough to return this. This is a really good point. So again, like I kind of relied on defaults, and as we'll see, helpful defaults in Spring Boot. But so for example, you might want to customize which response codes are returned. So I'll give you kind of a mainstream example. So GitHub, popular service for hosting your code. GitHub will often, so there is a difference between a repository doesn't exist. So like Josh Grant extensive Java example doesn't exist. It will probably never exist. That repository could also exist, but be private or be restricted to a certain number of individuals. So in those cases, so 404, so HTTP status 404 means the requested endpoint doesn't exist, or the requested resource doesn't exist. So there's no repository. 403 is an endpoint or a status code representing forbidden, meaning you do not have permission to view this. Now, GitHub will, even in the case of a repository that is, say, private or restricted in some way, may return a 404 instead of a 403. The reason being, and this could be arguably for security purposes, where you may not want someone to know that a repository exists, but they can't access it. You may just want to say this repository doesn't exist, right? So that's kind of a security concern or distinction that GitHub as service makes, which again, you'd have to customize, right? Like you'd have to sort of say, okay, instead of returning 403, return 404. There's also this awful anti-pattern where I can't even give you a good example of it, where services always return 200, like 200, they always return 200. So bad request, invalid request, everything, they always return 200 with some kind of error message. This is not great because the point of having other statuses is so you can tell someone like you made a bad request, or or like you didn't provide credentials and you're forbidden from accessing this because you don't have the credentials. Or like 200s are supposed to be like, you're good, you've made a good request, here's a good response, right? So yeah. Okay, you have given one demo on contract testing previously. Which one is faster, API testing or contract testing? So contract testing is in theory pretty fast, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Oh, thank you, another Joshua. That's good. So contract testing, we'll talk a little bit later on, little tiny bit. There is Sauce does offer contract testing as part of API Fortress or Sauce Labs API testing. So contract testing is really cool. Basically, like the idea of contract testing is I have this API, and I'm considering doing something around this, not now, but later. So yeah, don't be too disappointed. So the idea of contract testing is you have an API. The API has an open API spec. So like, here are the things you can do with it. Here are the endpoints that are supported, and here's how here's what the requests can look like that you can make that are valid or whatever. Like it defines like a consumer. So if I want to use or consume that RESTful API, I can look at the spec and say, okay, here's the things I can do. So contract testing says, okay, I'm going to verify that. I'm going to verify that if you give me, like based on your open API spec, like you're basically testing the spec. Like, is this still true? You know, if I consume this API in this way, will it still work, right? So this is very helpful. It's a very powerful way of testing, because you want to know, like, you know, if this API changes, the contract may change, right? And is this a bug or not, right? So so API testing. So I think, and there are colleagues of mine at Sauce that would have a better opinion on this than me. So contract testing is potentially much faster because you're just validating a contract. Like, you know, are you doing what you say you can do? Whereas API, like, you have to make a request. That request, you know, might have to go over a network connection. I might be testing an API that's located, like I'm in Canada, I might have to make a request that goes to Europe or the EU. It has to go under the ocean and back through the ocean. So it could be potentially slow or slower than a contract, which is like, oh, does this spec kind of match what's expected? So yeah, I guess that's kind of the little spiel on contract testing. But yeah, stay tuned for that. So so let's, okay, oh, so a moment, actually, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, getting through. It's been a busy week. Okay, so without further ado, let's write some automated tests. Okay, so for this section, we're going to write tests two ways. So one is from scratch. Oh. so one is from scratch. So we're just going to say, I have this service. I know where the address is, and I'm going to write tests for it from nothing. So these are good for basic tests. Like, let's say you want to just validate, like, does this get work? Does this, you know, or one-off tests, or also if you're doing exploratory testing, like let's say you're investigating a bug and it's like, well, I think it could be in the API layer. So I'm going to make this request with this post and this body and to kind of see. So like, this is a good approach. Also good for workflow tests. So like in the kind of world of CRUD applications, you might want to walk through a flow where you create, read, update, and delete an entity, or you want to validate that those things kind of work in that order or something like that. So this is from scratch. And then option number two, we're going to make use of this open API spec file. So instead of writing tests from scratch, and kind of trying to build up all of those tests, some of which will be the same from endpoint to endpoint or from scenario to scenario, we're going to see what we can get straight up from this open spec file. And then also there will be a little sort of discussion at the end around and this is a really super cool feature. I think this is the one of the coolest features of Sauce's API testing platform is running tests in CI. So you've written all these tests, you've done all this good work. So now let's like automate and run these tests as part of your CI/CD pipeline. All right, so let's jump into it. Okay, so that's enough of the slides. We don't need that anymore. So first things first. So as I mentioned, oh, that's not what I want. So as I mentioned, this application is all local. So it is running here on the local host. If you clone down and run, you can run it on your local host as well. If you're able to do that. So that's the instance I will be testing. So it will be a local instance. It could also be a public instance. So like I said, if you are virtuoso with deployments, you could easily just deploy this online somewhere. You could deploy it to the cloud using a service like Heroku, using a service like DigitalOcean, other ones. If you would like, you could absolutely do that. And then make it available kind of to the wider internet or something. But I'm just going to focus on the local case, which is particularly helpful for CI. So it's particularly helpful for thinking about testing. I'll loosely say modern API layers in CI. You'll kind of understand why modern is in quotes in a little bit. So I have this service up and running. It's been running for 45 minutes. Actually, no, I'm going to close it down and restart it just so I go back to a nice clean instance. Okay, so this is up and running. So let's go over to our tool. So like I said, I'll be showing Sauce Labs API testing, formerly API Fortress. So let's go over here, see what we have. So I'm going to log into Sauce Labs. This, and please, you can follow along. You can sit and enjoy, or you can also do this yourself as well. So with a free trial, you do have access to Sauce Labs API testing. Definitely try it out. It's fun. It's a good tool. I wouldn't be doing, honestly, I would not be doing this workshop if I didn't think this tool wasn't good. So, all right, so let's go to project. So this is kind of the splash screen of what you're going to see. So this tool is project-based. How you want to arrange projects is totally up to you. It's kind of trivial in this case. I have a project with a single endpoint, so I'm going to test that single endpoint. If you have multiple endpoints, or you want to kind of have projects by functional area, that works too. So I'm going to create a project, blank project, testing for good API workshop. Okay, and I can give it tags if I want, which I'm not going to. Main project for showing how to test a RESTful API service with Sauce Labs API testing. Okay. And you can also put notes in here if you want, and some other stuff, but I'm just going to save. So, so from scratch. So I have this service. What do I do with it? What the heck? What am I going to do with it? So I'm going to start with this API call. So this is recommended. We could go this way too, whatever. So I'm going to click use HTTP client. If you are familiar with Postman, which is a good tool as well, nothing wrong with it. Well, I would say nothing's wrong with it, but it's perfectly fine. A lot of people use Postman. It's free, just like Sauce Labs API testing. This is very similar workflow, very similar look and feel. So this is basically the HTTP client. This is where you can make single HTTP requests and get back responses. So this is where I can like construct some tests. So I'm in this folder. So let's make some tests. So let's start from the very beginning. Let's do the simplest thing that could possibly work. So HTTP. So I'm going to make it. So as I've mentioned a few times, I might want to A, verify does this is service up, and B, I have default values. So I'll get those 3 sauces. a green sauce, a cayenne sauce, and a ghost pepper sauce. And I will get all those back. And one more thing, just one more thing. So this is a local service, and I am using this cloud-based tool, right? So you might, so astute folks watching this workshop or following along might think, how are you going to connect to it? Like, you know, if I do this, like, what if I do this? What if I try to make a GET request to this local host? Well, I mean, errors, unexpected error, I can't connect, right? Well, there is a utility that you can use, and this is bundled into, so if I go back to here, this is where, and this strikes fear into the heart of mortals, this is where you can use Sauce's Sauce Connect proxy that connects your local network. So in this case, like my local laptop or your local workstation to Sauce's public facing services. So this includes API Fortress, or sorry, Sauce Labs API testing, or Slappy if you prefer. So SLA API, Slappy. So you can use Sauce Connect to connect your local instance or your local service to Sauce Cloud. So if, and I've helpfully, if you check out main, if you go check out main, something like this, you go get checkout main, click, you'll be able to get these. And if we go, oh, let's close all these up. We don't need these anymore. So if we go under, there's an SC folder or directory, and there are Sauce Connect builds or versions for Linux, Mac, and Windows. I happen to be running on a MacBook, but if you're using Windows, go into Windows. If you're on a Nix machine, I believe if you're running Alpine Linux, unfortunately this won't work out of the box, but Ubuntu will and Fedora will. So if I go, so I'm going to change directory to Sauce Connect, and I'm on Mac. So I have SC is the Sauce Connect executable. It's just a very basic executable. And I have this helpful method, or helpful script to start the tunnel from command line, right? From my local instance. And last and certainly not least, in fact, I'll kind of walk through this very briefly. So this is the script. The Windows case is the same. The Linux case is identical. And all I'm doing is starting Sauce Connect with this config file. And the config file here contains a few needed fields to use Sauce Connect with Sauce Labs API testing. So I select a region. Right now, only US West is supported. So if you're in India, then bear with us. Should be still pretty fast. API testing, like, to be honest, API testing in general is an order of magnitude faster than end-to-end testing with Selenium or Appium, way less flaky, just in general. Because, like, you know, you make a request, you get a response, right? Even if that request is going halfway around the world, still going to be faster than opening up a browser, opening up an application, clicking buttons, this sort of thing. So yeah. Not that end-to-end tests are not bad. They're great when used well. So I have this specific file, username and access key. I wonder if that's the problem. Sorry, I was thinking of something else. Username and access key. VM version is a thing that you need for now. This will go away eventually. And then tunnel identifier gives your tunnel connection a name. So long story short, since we're all SDETs and QAs here, effectively, this is a tunnel, a proxy connection between Sauce and your local machine. So I will walk through this. Definitely feel free to try this out. I put it in the repository so you can try it out. But also you don't have to do it if you're unable to. Again, Sauce Connect is complicated for the enterprise. We're not the enterprise, we're just having some fun today. So I'm going to start this tunnel up. Start tunnel. I'll get this fun Sauce bot here in the logging. That's super cool. And this will connect up. I should get a little green message saying Sauce Connect is started. You may start. Yeah. Okay, Sauce Connect is up. You may start your tests. So, racers, start your engines. Okay. So go back here. Now under tunnels again, because I'm testing things locally. Maybe let's use this actually. So instead of getting unexpected error, e-connection, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a tunnel, Josh Grant API, and so now if I send this GET request, I will get back the body with the list of these 3 sauces. Okay, so this is great. This is like the most basic thing. Like, is my service up? Oh, and I could also validate things like, you know, I'm supposed to get 3 entities in my list. They're all supposed to have these fields, this kind of thing. Get some information up here. Like I get back a JSON, which is expected. I get back a 200, which is expected. So if I click this generate test, give it a test name. Like I might want to call this like read initial values test, give it a name. I can also insert a tag, like create. Oh, I guess I didn't create any tags. Oh, sorry. So let's just go read initials values test. Initial ping to, or it's kind of not a good way. To monitor the beginning of my service, something like this. I don't know. Okay, so create test. Okay, so then this will automatically populate a test with all these good things. So here's the GET request. Let's just take a look into this. So, so one of the neat things about API Fortress, I will interchangeably call this Sauce Labs API testing and API Fortress. So just you can switch those in your head. So the nice thing about this tool is the URL is automatically parameterized. So for example, if you want to, it's possible to define different environments. So if you want to run against a staging environment versus a test environment versus a prod environment, and they all have similar but different URLs, you can parameterize that here. It's already parameterized for you. You also get this payload variable. So this kind of contains the information that you get back from the response in a payload, in a value called payload. But I can make edits as well. So like if I want to add a header, if I want to like add authentication, which is also something that is kind of out of scope for this workshop, I decided to keep it light and easy. Definitely a big topic though. So this is the initial GET request. And then here's some validation steps. So for example, I have this assert equals. So I verify that like my response headers has a content type of application JSON, which is expected. I also have to verify, or I verify that my payload is an array. So this is valid as well. So not to get too nerdy about it, but there's different, so JSON requests, again, valid JSON responses for HTTP requests are specified in detail in the spec. Again, like if you're sleepy, just start reading it and you'll fall asleep. So, and one of the valid JSON responses is an array. So you can have an array of JSON objects or JavaScript objects. But you could also have other things. You could have like a single integer. You could have a float. You could have like a JSON like actual object, you know, in JSON notation. It's also possible, fun fact, I learned this in my last job. You can also have null. You can have a response of null. So, or is it null or undefined? Like whatever the JavaScript equivalent is, which is different from an empty array, which is different from an empty JSON object, which is different from no response. Those are all valid JSON. So fun edge cases there for you to test. Anyway, so we're validating like, is this header application JSON, content type application JSON? Is the payload an array? And then for each element in the array, there is flow control in this tool, and it's generated. So for each element, you need to verify like the ID is some kind of integer. the name must exist, the description must exist, and the heat level must be an integer. You can kind of dig in here. And again, like if you want to add different, so this _1 is basically like your counter. So for _1 in array. So if you think about a for each loop in something like JavaScript or Python, or in Java as well. So it's something like it. So it loops through and verifies for every element that these things must exist. So this is pretty nice. And API Fortress will generate these things for you. So so just based on the kind of request, API Fortress, based on the request, will generate some of these for you, kind of with sensible defaults, right? So like it'll pick up like if something's an integer or a float or I guess maybe a string, but also it'll kind of do some sensible things as well. All right. And it also carries over this tunnel configuration. So if I run this test, right, initial read, it comes back. And I get this nice report. So so if something, so one, if I want to see like exactly what happened, like, okay, column insert equal, it gets this. So this is a nice report. You can pipe this to your reporting thing. You know, test teams love reporting. Some people do anyway. But anyway, that's what you get. And then you can also publish this test. So once you're happy with kind of the format of it, you can publish this. API Fortress follows a working copy published workflow. So if you want to run things in CI, or if you want to schedule things to run, you need to publish those things first. So if you make some changes, until you publish those changes, they won't be available to the wider system to kind of run regularly or be triggered by CI and this kind of thing. All right. All right, so this is pretty cool. I like this. This is good. So what else can we do? Let's make some more tests. So if we go back to tests, let's go back to the HTTP client actually. Okay. So what else can we do? Well, we could test like, does a post work? Can I create a new entry? So I'm going to specify my tunnel, and I'm going to see if I can redeem myself earlier. So sauce. And then for this, it's a post, and I would like to send some sort of JSON blob. So click here. So I'm going to create a new entry. And again, I don't have to, so I'm going to provide, I have to provide a name. So the name can be something like Smoky Chipotle, or the Big Smoke. Sorry, that's what I was going with, Big Smoke. So shout out if you live in Dublin, or if you live in London, or you live in Toronto. Big Smoke, colloquial name. Someone was from Dublin actually, so yeah, good job there. So it's the name of the Big Smoke. I need to pass in a description. So the description could be like a smoky, spicy chipotle sauce. And I'll have to provide a heat level. Maybe it's 6. Okay, and remember, I have to, these are both strings, and this is an integer. So this would be invalid. This is valid. Okay, picky. Okay, so so I've specified my tunnel. Send. Oh, 404. Oh no. Do I have a typo? Did my service go down? Sauces. Typo. Okay. So yeah, 404. Can't find that endpoint because I technically have not defined it. However, with sauces, I can. So I'm going to generate the test. Oh, sorry. I'm going to send. And this creates a new entry. So this creates an entry, and we get back this. So it has this ID. It's a long integer. So there's lots of digits here. So I can generate this test. This is create new sauce entry. Okay, great test. Okay, So this again generates everything kind of the same. The nice part is that I get posts, and then I also validate that I get back this, or I post with this body. So it kind of copies over the body it's in here, so that's good. Again, like it validates like that I require a content type header of application JSON. If I change this to application XML or application text, the test would fail because that is the wrong header. I'm not sending, or I'm not telling my API that I'm sending the correct content type. I'm not sending. I'm you know, JSON is technically different text, etc. Okay, payload must exist, so I can't send an empty post. Payload must be an integer, must exist, all these sorts of things, and heat level must be an integer as well, must exist and be an integer. So if I run this, that's fun. If I run this, this will post again. So this will create another sauce in my logs, right? And again, I haven't specified any uniqueness in the name, description, or the heat level. So you can post the same thing multiple times. The ID will change because they are different entries in your list. So, all right, let's open the report. Great. Okay. And it's published so I can kind of use this later on. So let's just take a skedaddle over back to tests. Now, the interesting thing is that because I've added, and this is an interesting test data kind of question. I've added, or problem, I guess I should say, because I've now added an additional log entry, these tests aren't independent. Like this test, or I guess, yeah, these two tests aren't independent. So if I go back to here, the good news is this test will still, or at least should still run and execute appropriately. But if I run this, I'm going to get something different. I'm not going to have 3 entries to loop through now. I'll have 4. But the way this test is structured, that's still fine. It's still going to check every single entry and kind of validate the fields of every entry in that list. So it works. But it isn't necessarily going to work. Like I might have some additional checks in here that, you know, like is the size of the integer 4, or is the size of the size of the list response 4 or 3 or 2? That might fail. So I wonder, payload must be array, and so as an exercise. So I can add a component, and you can, and again, you can manipulate these as well if you want to update them. So if I want to add this after, assert is payload must compare to payload 2. So payload length equals 3. Maybe this is a truly initial. Maybe this is truly an initial test. So like I want to validate, and this is a completely valid thing to do, where on startup, my service starts up, I collect my data, the data state. So let's run this and see what I get. And this now fails. Let's see where it fails. Fails and compares, right? Length compares to 3. One of the 2 objects is different. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Do we have a question? Can you show a scenario with basic auth 2.0? The answer is no, I cannot. So in this application, there is no authentication, none. There's no authentication layer. Spring does provide that. I also believe that Sauce Labs API testing does not currently support testing OAuth, at least OAuth 2.0, might be OAuth 1.0. Other forms of authentication, basic authentication, some other authentication is supported, but I will not be showing that today. One API token scenario, I will not be showing that. I know, I knew someone would ask this, and I knew someone would come away disappointed. I leave that as an exercise to you lovely folks. you can definitely add authentication to the sample app and then test it or try to test it with either API Fortress or with another tool. But I have decided not to show authentication. But very good topic for a future workshop or webinar, definitely. So yeah, sorry to disappoint. That is supported with Sauce Labs API, at least some forms of authentication, token-based authentication or header-based authentication. So yeah, excuse me. Right, okay, so I'm actually gonna get rid of this. It's just kind of a nice publish, I guess. Okay. All right, and just to wrap things up, let's do the last couple. So let's go to HTTP client. Let's do a put. So HTTP localhost 7000 API sauces. I'm going to choose this tunnel. And in this case, so let's update our very favorite, or well, probably my favorite of 3 sauces, maybe the jalapeno. But let's update entry 2. So I'm going to do this. So ID, oh, and I don't need to know this actually. What I need to know is pass in. So let's say I need to know entry 2. I'm going to go name. Red. Say I get the name wrong. You know, let's say I was in Mexico, and the label said Caliente Cayenne, and I went to buy the same sauce in Canada, and it's actually Red Hot Cayenne in Canada. Let's say, for example, or it could also be Rouge Cayenne, you know, depending on where you are in Canada. So name. And I actually have to put some quotes as well. That will JSON everybody. So description, a red hot medium sauce, and the heat level. Let's say the heat level, in fact, was actually like a 4. I had it as a 5 before, but let's say it's not quite as spicy. All right, so I can send. Okay, and I get back and it updates this. So ID is preserved because I'm doing a put. So I want to update this entry. Update existing sauce. It's an update. It's like this with I've experienced this with Git commit messages, where you start out with like, you know, I updated the controller to validate and, you know, boundary conditions for this, and then the next one is, you know, bug in the boundary conditions, and then your next is like bug typo. You just sort of, you know, done, next. Anyway, just human nature. You just drag on. So here's my put request. Again, same structure. Payload must exist, and we're going to run it and publish it. Okay, and last and certainly not least, we're going to do. Oh, it's taking a while. Okay, last and certainly not least, we're going to go back to HTTP client, and we're going to do a delete. So let's do delete. So HTTP localhost 7000 API sauces, and I want to delete number 2. Okay, and again, I don't need any body. I just need this URL. So I'm gonna, and I do need this. Okay, so I sent this, and it works. So I get a 204. So we get a 204 back. So this works. No body, empty body, totally valid. I can't see my headers here. So there are headers, but I can also generate a test. So I'll generate this test, delete sauce. Okay. So another fun thing. So again, I've kind of I was a bit surprised by this, so delete requests by default in Spring Boot are what is known as idempotent. So that means if I make the exact same request with the same headers and body, etc., I will get back the same response, even if I make that same request multiple times. So, so if I run this again, the test will pass, and I will get back like a 204. I will get it back all the stuff, which is, I did not expect this. I expected there to be this kind of whole issue, and we'd have this whole conversation around like, oh, you have to make sure your tests are structured properly. But it turns out Spring Boot off the shelf allows you to delete multiple times. So if you delete something that doesn't exist, you'll still get back 204. Arguably, this is good behavior because you know, you're trying to delete an entry, and if it's not there, then you technically have deleted it. So good job, everybody. But just again, keep this in mind. It may make more sense for you to kind of raise an exception or kind of throw back an error where you say, you know, this sauce with ID blah 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 has not been found. You know, something like this. Again, totally depends on your context, depends on what the service is doing. For this demo application, this totally makes sense. So that's fine. So I'm going to publish this. So now I have these 4 tests. So back to tests. So I have these 4 tests all set and ready to go. And I can even click run all. So from the UI, oh, look at this initial read value. Let's see. One of them failed. What happened? Payload length. See, I didn't publish my changes. And this is what happened. So shame on me. But it makes sense. Let's go back in here and edit. Edit. I'm going to trash this one. Great. And I'm going to run just to validate this does work, and then I'm going to publish. Okay. So I go back to my tests. So now I have these lovely 4 tests, and they all work. So I can run them all, and they will all pass. Feel free to criticize my test approach, but hey, I'm running a workshop. So yeah, any questions at this point, just about like basic creating tests from scratch? Yeah, it's kind of a soft delete. Like it's like if it exists, delete it. If not, then you still return like a 200 or 204 or something. Can I extract data from the response and use it in subsequent requests? Yes, you can. So actually, so that's the other nice scenario for making use of writing tests from scratch. Let's say you have a workflow test. So I'm going to go back here. Yeah, so great question. So this is like the very simplest thing you can do. What is the simplest thing you could possibly do? So I'm just going to make a request, and you could even do something else. You could say, let's go to HTTP client. I don't know. I guess we didn't actually test like get like HTTP localhost 7,000 API sauces 1. Oh, okay. Got this. Yeah, so instead of getting back a list, in this case, so read a single value. I'll just kind of do this for completeness, and then we'll kind of walk through workflow testing. So here, very similar to the earlier GET request where we find all and get all list of endpoints. Here, this is a single entry, so we don't loop through anything. We can publish this, run it, but again, like same idea. So, so we actually have 5 tests. We should make 6, but like, you know. So let's go back to tests. Oh, and no data. Let's run it. So there's data. Okay, great. So what the other nice scenario is creating workflow. So this is a very, very common approach. So let's create a test. So this is from scratch. So we were using the HTTP client to make a single request and generate a test based on that single request. But we can also go to, so we'll call this like a workflow test. Okay. walk through a CRUD workflow of the sauce logs application. Okay. So we're going to create a test. So in this case, instead of starting from the HTTP client, we're going to start from this screen. So basically, you can add any steps you would like. So for example, we can start with a post. So HTTP localhost 7000 API sauces. Payload, I think by default is this, and no authentication. So a very, very common workflow that you're all probably a little upset that I didn't cover is an authentication-based workflow. So you authenticate into a system and then you perform some actions, right? So that's technically a test that has multiple steps. And based on your authentication approach, you might have to structure that differently. So I'll kind of just show this here. So add body, content type application JSON. So let's do name, and we'll call this one easy green. And like, what else will I have? Habanero. Oh, hatch special. A warm sauce made from hatch chilies. So if you are down in, I believe it is New Mexico, there is, or if you're ever visit Mexico, I've never, but I would love to go there. So there is a variety of chili called a hatch pepper, or chili pepper, I guess I should say, heat level. And these hatch chilies have a very distinctive flavor. I wouldn't call them spicy, they're warm. So they're between a sweet bell pepper and between a jalapeno. So jalapenos are kind of hot by themselves, and then sweet bell peppers are not hot at all. So hatch chilies are, they have a little bit of flavor, not necessarily hot, but they're a little bit of flavor. They're grown in Mexico, hatch chilies, kind of a specialty of that area of the world. So heat level of like 3. Okay. All right, so I might want to make this request, and then I want to get, and then I do HTTP localhost 7000 API sauces. I don't know what the ID would be, so I just want to get them all. So I make that request. Oh, sorry, payload. And then I want to assert so expression is payload. I can't remember actually, like, so this was actually an issue that I was having. So in my, I didn't realize this until too late. So when I make a request to get all of the sauces, it provides me a list, right? So it just provides me a list. This list is, there's no guarantee that it will be in any order. There's no guarantee that if I add a new entry, it will go to the end. It could go anywhere in the list. Just depends on how it's processed. So there's no easy way to kind of say, okay, get the last element of the list and verify it's this, or kind of go to entry 4 or go to entry n+1. There's no way to kind of do those things. Which is a test design problem. Like, that's a problem on me for how I designed the API. It is not a fault of the test approach. So I have to sort of work with it in place. So I might want to just verify that I have payload. Actually, no, I don't want to do this. I want to do assert. think it's assert exists. Response actually exists. Oh, I don't recall how to expression. Something like, I don't recall what this would be. So anyway, we'll just leave out the assertions, I think, for now. So post get, I can do a put. So I might want to do something like a localhost, oh, sorry, HTTP, localhost 7000 API sauces. And I don't know what that's going to be. Maybe I'll just update, like I can assume it's 4, but I don't think it is. So let's say 3. What you'd want to do is get something like, anyway, and add body, oh, payload, body content. So I'm going to update this third to kind of say aim. This one was the hot, super hot, hot and spicy ghost pepper. Hot, spicy ghost pepper, and last, certainly not least, is heat level. Heat level 10, let's say. Okay, and then last and certainly not least, we're going to delete HTTP 7000 API sauces 3, and that's about it. Okay, so there. Oh, payload. So let's run and see what we get here. So this did fail. Where could it have possibly failed? Let's see. So the post works. We're able to post a new sauce. The get works. We're able to get all the list of sauces. Looks like there is an issue with sauces 3. So let's see. Okay, 400. 400 suggests bad requests. Maybe something in the body. So let's take a look. But also the delete also failed. So I wonder, unexpected end of JSON input. Okay, so this is a typo, and this could be a little more sophisticated typo. So let's take a look. So you kind of get some nice information, especially when you're designing tests. Localhost API sauces 3. Oh, that body. Yes, typo here, description, it's quotes. Okay, so let's try that out. Must have cascaded down. Okay, so let's run, see if we get this working. Oh, still doesn't work. This is the main idea though of how you kind of work through delete. Oh, still unexpected end of JSON input. But why? This doesn't look bad. Must be mode JSON. Do I have to add a header? Do I have to go like content type? JSON, might need that actually. All right. Let's run. Still failed. Interesting. Anyway, so this would be how you would construct a workflow test. There are also lots of utilities in API Fortress for things like flow and control. So you can do like if you want to iterate through, like let's say you want to get all the sauces and then or get all the sauces here and then kind of iterate through to verify like are they all valid? Do they all contain things? Again, like you may have some sort of authentication step. So the main approach, I think, add component before. So I believe, let me just see here. Yes. So the main approach for authentication would be to make some kind of post. So either you would post, so for like one easy case is basic authentication in HTTP. So you might say, like, say I had this behind like Josh and user or Josh super secret password at localhost 7,000 sauces API or API sauces. And then what you would be able to do is pull out values from the payload or from the headers that would contain your token, and then you could kind of go into the next step. So so I believe, and I don't recall if there's additional functionality for more sophisticated authentication like OAuth and those sorts of things. But as a first step, like this is kind of the recommended approach for handling authentication. I can tell you that it was exactly the same kind of workflow if you were to, at least in my case, when I built my own test framework, I kind of did the same thing. I had a method, or I guess a function, and it would authenticate, make a post request or make some sort of authentication request, get back tokens. There would have to be some other shenanigans it would handle. And then it would pass in that token into a session, and then you'd be able to kind of use that session throughout. So this is kind of the basic workflow of authentication: is make a post, authenticate, get back that token or get back that session ID, and then kind of pass that around as needed. And so the easiest way to do that in a tool like API Fortress, or in a roll your own test framework, is to kind of handle that in a single test, or handle that in some kind of session. Oh, how do you create a test suite from here? Okay, great. So let's do this. Okay. Oh, I want to trash this whole thing anyway. It won't work. Okay. So let's say I have these tests. So this might be a workflow. So I'll save, I'll publish it. It's failing. That's okay. Failing tests are still tests too. So the question was from, let's just go up. So from Sneha, the question was, how do you create a test suite? Well, so once you've generated these tests, and you go back to tests here. So once you've created these, there's a couple different ways you can sort of think about a test suite. So the easiest way is to just run them all. So I have everything in my project, and I'm just going to run all of my tests in my project, and this will be my test suite. So that's one way to go. So another way you could go is to tag things. So for example, I could edit. So for example, this workflow test, I might want to run it separately. I might want to run it less often than these other tests, or more often. So let's edit this, and let's add a step before, component before, tag, workflow tests. I think I might have to add these tests. Okay, so tag as workflow tests. So now if I go back to tests, run, save, save, and then publish. Okay, if I go back to tests now, what I can do is I can create a tag. Sorry, I did that the opposite way. Should create the tag first and then tag them. So custom tag, workflow, save. Add this. So I could then tag these workflow tests. Oh, sorry. And then you could run tests according to tag. So if you want to run, or you could have acceptance regression, you could have service A, service B, service C. And so the idea would be from from CI, for example, or from monitoring, you could then run subsets of tests. You could run all of your tests, test by tag, this kind of thing. Okay, time, perfect. Okay, so so for those of you who are still awake, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, this is fine. This tool seems better than Postman, but like it's so much work. Like, Josh, there must be an easier way, and there is. So all those things I did. So I wrote these tests from scratch. So I made the requests. I kind of put in my body. I did all of that work. But if you recall from the earlier part of this workshop, I also talked about an OpenAPI spec file. So that actually defines all of the endpoints and high-level behaviors of what this API service allows. So you can also create things from that. So this is really, really helpful. And if I go back to projects, and let's create a project. Testing for good spec OpenAPI, or I guess from spec. Okay. Add a custom tag spec. Okay. Generated tests directly from the Open API spec file. So as you may recall, we did create this very easily, I might add. We did create this open spec file directly from our service, right? So whether you're using Spring Boot, whether you're using Flask or Django, whether you're using Ruby on Rails, something like this, you should be able to very easily generate the spec file. So once you have this as an SDET, as a QA, you might start thinking to yourself, like, how can I use it? So let's do it this way. So I'm going to actually, just for completeness. Okay, so back to projects. So I'm going to click on OpenAPI Postman. And here, I'm going to look for that spec file. So in this case, so if I go to documents and I go to presentations, I'm still not good at this. I'm still not like looking through files. Like, I don't know. And this is testing for good Java API. Specs, and I think I'm going to choose this YAML. I believe that is the preference of the system. So, so I'm going to import the spec file, the YAML format, and I'm going to import right from here, save, and bingo bongo, I get created directly. I get these pre-populated tests. So now this is helpful for a few reasons. One is you will cover everything. So in my previous case, I did not have the post example, I believe. I did not have this, or sorry, I did not have, which one? I think it was this one, update or get. I missed one of these. I did not have enough, or I could have missed one. I'm even thinking, did I miss one? Here, the spec file defines all of the endpoints and what is supported by all the endpoints. So you are definitely covering everything. It's also helpful if you have a non-trivial service that has many different endpoints with many different specifications. Like, you might be able to find a sauce by ID. Maybe you can find a sauce by name. Maybe there's a combination of name and an ID, or some kind of find like that. So you can capture everything, and then from here, everything's pre-populated for you. So I'm going to select this tunnel, and I can generate a test. So create. So this is really helpful because now, hang on, let's go back. So this is really helpful because you have this great starting point. So I'm actually going to go into HTTP client. And you've also saved these things as well. So again, like if you have a complicated service with many different endpoints, you might find yourself, like kind of keep track of them. Like how do I do this? Do I test this? So you can kind of fill these all in here. So this kind of populates this nicely. Read. And you can run, you get these kind of nice tests for a starting point. All right, question. Usually nested endpoints are difficult. Yes, this is true because, and again, like this is kind of the most basic example. So you do get a nice starting point with OpenAPI. And again, like, I mean, even starting from the Open API UI or docs page, you can get a feel for like what endpoints are there, whatever. But you also get a nice starting point here in the Sauce Labs API. So this is pretty fun. So if I go back to tests, so I can kind of create all these tests based on these things here. You can also kind of nicely do like, some fun test cases. Like, for example, if I want to do a find all, or like, no, actually I want to post, but I specifically want to post and this is a feature I just found out about like not long ago. So you can also get generated values. So so API Fortress will kind of provide quote unquote kind of dumb values. So this is a string, so it gives a string a description, gives a name, which is also a string. The ID is a long, and then the heat level is an int. So here's an integer. I wouldn't say I've ever had hot sauce that's minus 250,000 heat on a scale of 1 to 10. But this is helpful. Let's say I have logic in my application. I don't. Like for example, if I send this, I do have logic actually. Good for me. So I can't use this, but I can still generate a test and I can choose a response. So I happen to know this will create like a 400 level response. So invalid heat level test. So something like this. So I can also create negative tests as well as positive tests. So with the additional logic here, so payload must exist, payload heat level must exist. And run out of passes. I could also add like, heat level here, assert, I think is it greater than? Okay, so I'm actually gonna scrap this for now. If I go here, heat level, payload heat level, because I have a single value that represents a hot sauce. Cancel. Okay, I can also do assert. Heat level must be greater than 0. Oh dear. All right, but I can do some testing this way. I can do some kind of comparisons, and I can kind of generate some basic tests, right? Even with generated test data, so that's also helpful. So I get a starting point. So even starting from scratch, based on this Open API spec, I kind of know what fields have to look like, what kind of fields are valid and invalid. All right, so let's go back here, go back to tests. Oh, unpublished. Run both of these. Let's just publish them again for completeness. So edit, publish. And edit, publish. Right. So I can run all, and again, like I can make a test suite this way, which again, like in a different project, I could say, you know, how to run all these tests. Yeah. So any questions overall about either creating tests from scratch or creating tests from an open API? Based, so something from Automation Enthusiast. Based on incorrect heat level, we are returning 400 bad request is correct. Could there be some other error code, or we could use this as the request is correct? It's just the value. Yes, I think, I can't remember. This might depend on what is in the Open API specs. So, and I didn't really dig into this in my test application. Like, for example, you could have different scenarios where, like in your actual API, like return a 400 if, return 401 if, instead of returning a 200, return a 201. There could be valid use cases for this. So I think the spec value will kind of determine, it will figure out or provide, like, you know, what are the valid HTTP responses for this endpoint, or at least like by the spec anyway. Like you could always have a 500. So 500 level errors mean server side problem. So server side messed up. So so that could mean your service is down. It could mean that your service is not responsive. It could mean that you've quite literally hit like a bug in the actual backend code, and the system can't kind of handle that gracefully. So based on incorrect heat level, returning 400 request is correct. So I believe that those populated values, so by default, I think there's 200 and maybe 400. But if you have other things specified in your spec file, or in your source, I guess the source of your REST, that would pop up as well. So like, can I get a 400? Can I get a 200? That kind of thing. Yeah, but really good question though. Yeah. And any other questions? All right, so so I guess at this point, I'll kind of just walk a bit through running tests, either running tests scheduled or in CI. And then at the end, I would definitely appreciate folks giving some feedback. So if they want to provide some written feedback in the chat, or if you want to tell me, I can also, I don't know if we have like a link or something, you can also provide feedback that way. But yeah, so let's bring it home and let's talk about this. So someone mentioned earlier, how do you run a test suite? How do you organize test suites? And this is really another cool feature of API Fortress. Oh, is there something else? Oh, thank you. Oh. So you might want to set up your tests to run, like, just run everything at this, run everything every night or every 24 hours, or run these suites, every 6 hours. You might also, in the API world, you might also want to verify, like, is my service up? And so every 5 minutes, send a request, make sure the service is up. If I get anything other than like a 200 level response, page everyone and tell everyone, like, oh, this is down, you have to do something. So we can do this in kind of a couple different ways. So API Fortress / Sauce Labs API does provide monitoring and scheduling of tests. So for example, if I go back to my projects, and I might go back to, I'll do my best Nigella Lawson impression, and I'll talk about something I've prepared earlier. So here's a pre-work of this. So here's some tests. They look very familiar to the tests that we've seen. But the big distinction is this test project does have a webhook. So this webhook, oh, actually, I'll get to this in a bit, but this webhook is definitely helpful if you want to externally trigger these tests from another service, something like CI or PagerDuty. You might want to integrate this in with PagerDuty. So if like your service goes down, like someone gets paged, hey, check this out. But let me see here. Dashboard. The first thing I will show is just how to schedule these tests. So here's a logs of tests. We'll let's run, but we might want to schedule these notifications. I'm trying to think of. No, not the vault. Back to projects, tools. I think this is it. No, these are the two other things. Activity is to be able to schedule. It's funny because I remember dashboard settings. Let's go with settings for a moment. You should be able to schedule these. Why are we not? It's funny. Sorry, because I know there's a way to schedule someone else's found these tests. Can we mock? Yes, I can speak to that. Oh, can we fix broken links with an API? Yeah, you probably could. Under test sections, environments, vault, logger, dashboard. Yeah, that's it. Okay, thank you. Yes. So sorry, you have to do this. So let's click all. No. So what you can do is you can schedule a test to run. So this is helpful to do by test. Because one, you might want to run a test on a schedule, like every hour, or you just want to verify like does the service work. But you also might want to monitor. So let's do this. So create a schedule. So for this CRUD workflow tests, let's say I just want to verify that my workflow works. I can schedule something to run on a given periodic schedule. So workflow monitor. Run every 10 minutes to monitor our something like this. And you can choose a time zone. So I'm based in Toronto. So I want to use EDT, whatever the heck, whatever we are. And I want to run every 10 minutes, or sorry, every 5 minutes here. And I do, or I guess we could run every 5 minutes, sure. Just for simplicity, on the 10 after, let's say, and I will use this service, this tunnel that's up. So now every 5 minutes, so this will kind of kick off, unless I want to pause it. I may pause it for maintenance. I may pause it because I know a service is going down for some reason. So like I might want to do that. I can also edit and delete. So I can do this, and I believe there's. I thought there was a way you could. I thought there was a way you could schedule all tests, but maybe not. Anyway, but you can schedule single tests to run, which is very helpful. So right from the tool, If you want to use testing for monitoring, you can do that. So that's really good. The other approach that you could do is, but obviously, and this is super cool, is running tests from CI. So this is where the beauty and strength and power of Sauce Connect comes to full fore. Not to be too dramatic, but this is kind of the nice thing about being able to run using using Sauce Labs API testing with a local build, and also with a Sauce Connect instance. Is that, so let's say you have a CI service, and the CI service is on a container or hosted in the cloud, or even just on a node somewhere in your network. So you can build, deploy, and test your API service all on that single instance, on that single container, or what have you. And I do have an example of this. So something that the kids really like to use these days is GitHub Actions. Jenkins. So it's really interesting, because I get this question sometimes, is what CI systems or what tools do people use? And 4 years ago, I would have said Jenkins. 90% of people use Jenkins. Jenkins, either a hosted instance in CloudBees, or more commonly like a self-hosted instance. Love it or hate it, Jenkins is around. Now, 4 years later, definitely a big growth in cloud-based CI systems, whether you're talking about GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps or even Circle CI, taken off, definitely taken off. There's pros and cons both ways. It's out of scope for this workshop to talk about that, but there it is. People like Cloud CI. So what I've done here, I have created this build deploy. It should really be build and test. Yeah, build deploy test. And this is the basic workflow. So this is doing the steps kind of that I've done manually. So if we go back, just as a refresher. So I have, we'll close this up actually just for fun. So what have I done locally? So in order to run run a local instance, I first started with Gradle boot run. So Gradle boot run. Could also do Gradle build. So if I was making significant code changes, just want to verify that I can build my application. There's no compile errors. I'm not missing any dependencies or local kind of simple dependencies. And then so that's my build step. Then I have a deploy step where I actually start up my service somewhere. So whether that's on the same host on the same workstation as I've done here and kind of throughout this workshop, or I might deploy it somewhere else. I might have a test instance that I spin up. Maybe I'm clever and I have like a Docker, I have this Dockerized, and I can kind of ship that container somewhere and kind of open it up. But I do deploy my application somewhere. And then lastly, I also test it. So once I have my service up and running somewhere, I can then test that service to verify things like a workflow, CRUD workflow. Is it functioning properly? Am I getting 200s, et cetera? Okay, so that's what I'm doing here. Is I'm doing Gradle build, boot run, and then because this is local, you can kind of imagine this as either like a CI container or CI workstation. So I've deployed my application on this workstation, and I also need to connect it to Sauce Labs, which is in the cloud, which is not like a unique thing with Sauce. Like if you're using any sort of cloud service, you're gonna have to network your stuff together in the cloud. So either opening up, and there's a variety of ways to do that. I am like the last person who should ever kind of advise you on this. But with Sauce Labs, you can use Sauce Connect. So this is starting up. And then I also run my tests. So Sauce Labs API testing is also running in the cloud. So I need a way to trigger that or trigger those tests on demand. So what does that look like? Well, so here are those steps in YAML. for GitHub Actions. So first thing, I'm deciding to use Ubuntu. I set up my JDK 11 like this. I do a build. So, I verify, again, fail fast, fail hard. There's no point in trying to test something if it doesn't even compile. So I want to do a build step. Then I start Sauce Connect. With my username and access key, I can also pass in my config file. So nice infrastructure as code kind of piece here. And then I start up. So again, very, very rudimentary. I'm just going to do boot run, deploy with Gradle. So that kind of runs on this environment, on this container. And then last and certainly not least, I'm going to run my tests. So, and that's partially, or no, that's the main reason why I went back to using this pre-work tests, because I was able to create a webhook. If I go to webhooks. So I was able, so I'm using this webhook to basically trigger these tests remotely from this service. Oh, that's not what I want. So I'm able to use this. Again, I can use this in multiple places, but in this case, I'm going to use it in my cloud-based CI. And the way this is controlled, so API Fortress has a util that's Docker-based, so a Docker container, APIF CTL or API control, which we can take a look at. I'll go here. API testing. So CI/CD. So this will work with almost any platform, CI/CD platform. So this API control or APIF control is a Docker container, and this allows you to control and manipulate running tests. Oh, we have a junior person joining very late, but that's okay. Creating API webhook. So we've created the webhook, but then here is the various ways you can execute tests. So you provide your webhook, you provide your Sauce credentials, but then you can also run tests. You can just run all tests in the project. So like I said, like depending how you want to structure your projects, you could have a project per service, project per endpoint. That might be a little excessive, but like, hey, whatever works for you. And you might say, okay, by default, I'm just going to run all the tests in that project. So I'm just going to set that up and run. So you're going to run all. So let's do that. But you can also do other things as well. You can, run by a tag. Oh, tunnel ID. Okay, so let's go back to here. Oh, you want to see my Twitter? Yikes. Okay. So as an example, let's just edit this. Let's just see what we get. So as kind of a starting point, I'm going to remove the Sauce Connect instance, just so we have something to kind of show and work with. Okay. Great pull request, no thanks. So if I go sorry, I have to do this on main. So I go to GitHub workflows, build, deploy, edit, sorry, click the wrong button. So I'm going to remove this Sauce Connect business, start commit, and I'm actually going to commit all right, let's create pull request, I guess. thought you could just commit right to main. Anyway, I must be thinking of something else. So let's see what we get. GitHub Actions. Oh, I know what's happening. I know. Okay, sorry everybody. Gonna have to go over here. Gonna have to pull this out. Was using oh, I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna have to go GitHub. It was all going so well. I just need to use this account, not the other account. So let's go into pull requests. And then approve and run because I can. All right, so now if we go back to actions, we're gonna see. So I have two. I have two files. So one is a basic build. So this is what was generated by default by GitHub Actions. Set up JDK build with Gradle. So this runs. This will complete. No problem there. The more interesting of the two is this build deploy with testing involved. So let's see what happens here. So we're going to build with Gradle. This should also run and pass. I guess we'll just take some questions here. Is there a way to add dependency test step? There is. I don't know how to do that offhand. I've seen it in GitHub Actions. The answer is yes. So in GitHub Actions, you can have conditional statements where, if build succeeds, proceed, right? Or if build fails, do this other action. Generally speaking, though, if an action fails, and this is a very good CD practice, if a step fails, it halts and doesn't stop it and go any further. So generally a good default, but yes, you can also have conditional steps. Similar with Jenkins. Can't remember if you do the Jenkins pipelines. It's been a while. Okay, deploy with Gradle. Oh, I see. So you can't do this. Interesting. Okay, so let's just edit and run because I'm in the right browser at least. So let's go to code. Fails to load latest commit information. And I definitely leave this as an exercise for the user. Tried to put this all together, and it turns out it was a little more complicated than I thought. The steps would be all of the same. Let's just get rid of that, I guess. Start commit. I'm going to commit this directly to the main branch. All right, so yes. So yeah, I would definitely play around with this. You can't do this. I recommend, no, I don't recommend, you have to add your Sauce Labs credentials as a secret. So if we take a look, actually, if we go back, I'll just kind of walk through a little bit of the structure of how this YAML looks. So kind of dig into the guts just so folks know what to do. So for example, if you're using Sauce Connect, you need a Sauce username and access key. Similarly, oh, it's way down at the bottom here. Let's see if I can just make it bigger. Similarly, if you're going to run tests using APIF control, it is a Docker-based image. So you will also need your Sauce username here and Sauce access key in this URL or role if you prefer. You will also need your API hook. So I also recommend putting that in. You can get the API hook. So let's go back. Nope, not that one. So get your API hook from here. So the hook UUID, I guess, is here. You can also get the full HTTP URL here as well. So you can create a hook. You can create as many hooks as you'd like. Backup hook. And these hooks should last forever. So there's no, which is a good question actually for usage, but also like if you have any security concerns. So these hooks can be deleted, but they by default will last forever. So they're not scheduled. They won't be removed after a certain time. They will be here for the duration of your project. So once you delete the project, they're gone, but otherwise they're around. So let's go back. Let's see if I can get this. Yeah, this didn't work. Oh, this is old. I'm also learning I'm not really a YAML fan. Start Sauce Connect. Aha. So this is where I was caught up before. So this is a required step. I'm going to cancel this. What I'd like to do is go to code. I'm going to edit this file here. Just going to turn this off for a moment. It doesn't like this, but it really doesn't like the whole thing. So let's get rid of it. Okay, main. These are moments where I feel a bit like Bob Ross, you know, and he might put too much paint on the canvas, or he kind of paints the wrong way, and there aren't really bugs. There's just happy little features, right? We're here to explore together. Let's learn together. So so while this is cooking, so last is certainly far from least. I will go back. Oh, I guess we can go back here. And the last thing I will mention, I didn't get to it in this workshop, unfortunately, but great. And definitely please let me know if you'd like a workshop on this, or webinar or something. Not Vault. Logger. Notifications. Oh, I just saw that screen. It's really helpful. So the screen does contain, so we mentioned contract testing earlier in the workshop. So Sauce Labs and Sauce API testing does support contract testing. This is really cool. It's one of, I think it's one of the only tools on the market where you can kind of do functional testing, schedule testing, generate for an open API, and contract testing. The contract testing tool is called Piastri. So this is where, again, you kind of test the consumer and producer, you know, together. I wish there was the link. It was Piastri. So the tool is Piastri. So the way it works kind of in general, yes, Piastri. So API mocking. So there's two additional features I didn't get to in this workshop. So one is contract testing. The other is API mocking. So with API mocking using OpenAPI, I'll turn this on too. With OpenAPI, you can create a mock service. So because you know with OpenAPI, like specifically what you can and cannot do with your API based on the spec, it's possible that you can create a mock service. So this is really helpful. Let's say you have a service that's a third party service, or even a service from like another team within your org. You can get the spec file, but nothing else. You can then mock out those requests so you're not dependent on that service being up and available when you need it to be. You can create mock requests, or kind of handle mock responses. So that's one element of Piastri, this project. The other thing you can do with Piastri is contract testing. So you can also create If we go to contract testing here, we'll kind of provide all these links later on. You can also kind of test the contract and agreement between consumer and producer. So there's a little explanation here. So, yeah, so this is good. I think, let's just see just before. It's 4 minutes, it's still taking a while. Deploy with Gradle. Interesting, these things are getting hung up. Now I have a theory. So this is an aside. It's great giving virtual workshops because it's almost like I'm talking to myself. So I have a theory. So cloud-based services are hosted in things like containers. So hosted in the cloud on hosts and containers. Circle CI is container-based. GitHub Actions is probably container-based. I don't know that for sure. And so as the end user, you do not have any control over the host or the container. So you don't, which is a benefit. You don't have to worry about networking or spinning up and down machines or running out of memory or running out of disk space. You don't have to worry about that. Like that gets taken care of by someone else. The downside is sometimes you have specific network requirements. So for example, with Sauce Connect, as we've shown, you might want to network and connect to localhost. So localhost, like a service running on localhost port 7000 or something similar. This Circle CI did not allow this. So Circle CI did not expose localhost, at least in its free tier service. So you couldn't do it. So you could not use Sauce Connect off the shelf, or you could not launch a service to localhost and access it on Circle CI, at least on the free tier. There were some hacks to get around this, but then those hacks were closed up. So good security posture, but kind of unfortunate for some use cases. I have a feeling that GitHub Actions is doing something similar, where once upon a time you could easily just access localhost NBD, but now that may not be as possible. So it's kind of my working theory. As a solution architect with Sauce Labs, I spend a lot of time thinking about these kinds of things. So yeah, Sauce Labs, every experience counts. So yeah, so this is it. So I don't think we're gonna get here. I think it's gonna get stuck. Gradle's not gonna be very happy with us, but that kind of concludes the workshop. Definitely, I will provide this link one more time. Definitely try it out. Download this if you want to kind of see how, if you want to see how, if you want to see how this service works, definitely try it out, use it for your own purposes, whatever you'd like. But also a free trial of Sauce Labs API, definitely try that out with this service, with another service. There is a good one that's open. You don't need Sauce Connect for RESTful Booker by Mark Witteringham. RESTful Booker. This is one definitely geared to testing and API testing, hosted on Heroku. So yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and please, there is a link in the chat, Google Docs. So please leave feedback, good, bad, and ugly. I want to get better. Hopefully this was helpful. I want to give you something to kind of help you with your testing practice, API testing practice. So yeah, I hope you had some good takeaways today. Thank you.